Prime Minister Mark Carney says the Canada-China relationship is at a turning point after meeting with President Xi Jinping on the sidelines of the summit.
Prime Minister Carney and President Xi meet for Canada's fraught relationship with China and for Carney's ambitions to diversify trade.
Prime Minister Mark Carney is signaling a new approach this morning. We have images from Carney's meeting just a few hours ago with Xi Jinping on the sidelines of the APEC summit.
Although Trump intended to send Canada a lesson, the consequences went well beyond Ottawa. A bitter dispute between Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney and President Donald Trump had grown into something much more significant by the fall of 2025, marking a shift in the balance of power in the world. Instead of strengthening America's position, the White House's trade restrictions and tariffs forced long-standing allies to look for new allies. Canada started looking to Asia. Japan strengthened its resource links with China, while Europe renewed relations with Beijing. Quietly, a new economic alignment was emerging that would alter the balance of power for years to come. Is this the time when America's allies begin constructing a world without it? Early in October, there was an unexpected break. Following a parody advertisement from Ontario that ridiculed his tariff agenda, President Donald Trump halted all trade talks with Canada. Ottawa did not react with speeches or indignation. It went in a different path. In a matter of days, Prime Minister Mark Carney's staff traveled to Asia to set up high-level discussions, including a private conversation with Chinese President Xi Jinping. This was a necessary evolution rather than an abrupt change for Canada. Its industries had been stretched and consumer costs had increased due to years of escalating tariffs on steel, lumber, and automobiles. Washington's message was unambiguous. The closest neighbors of America would be viewed as adversaries. In light of this, Carney worked to lessen Canada's reliance on the U.S. and increase its influence outside of North America. The decision could backfire, according to domestic critics who described it as a jump from one challenging partner to another. However, the driving force was economic survival rather than ideology. A mid-sized country like Canada has to find a substitute when the world's biggest economy shuts down its markets. In that quest, Canada was not the only country. Governments that had previously been closely associated with Washington were reconsidering their stances throughout Europe and Asia. Western trade was rocked when the White House imposed broad import tariffs ranging from 25% to 35% in the middle of 2025 in order to secure vital supply networks. European leaders started re-establishing contact with Beijing, while South Korean manufacturers, long dependent on American consumers, negotiated multi-billion-dollar contracts with Chinese electronics companies. Japan discreetly increased its mineral exports to China through new port agreements in Yokohama and Dalian. Earlier that year, each of these countries had inked trade agreements with the U.S., the EU in August, Japan in September, and South Korea in October. Few, however, think those agreements would endure. Partners were unsure about their future due to Trump's propensity to abruptly halt or cancel negotiations. China was not their first option. It served as a safeguard. Economic pressure served as the foundation for the White House's version of America First. Trump used tariffs and agreements to force businesses to relocate production domestically and abide by American-defined access regulations. It seems to be effective in the short run. Parts of the Midwest saw the reopening of factories, and the administration applauded every fresh story of reshore employment. However, intimidation-based diplomacy quickly becomes tiresome. The president's decision to end talks with Ottawa over a television commercial sent a message to the world that trade with the United States could turn personal at any time. America's power depended on continuity for many years. Military security was guaranteed by NATO. The G7 provided political coordination, and the USMCA tied North America together. Allies' behavior changed when that predictability was replaced with volatility. Although they no longer trusted the regulations overseeing them, they nevertheless valued access to U.S. markets. Beijing acted swiftly to seize the opportunity. Despite escalating tensions with Washington, China's Ministry of Commerce recorded a 12% growth in commerce with Western countries by late September. According to Canadian export data, more agricultural and energy items are being shipped through British Columbia's Pacific ports, primarily to Asian consumers. This was an easy opportunity for China. Beijing's steadiness became more alluring as Washington seemed more unpredictable. The calculation was far more difficult for Western countries. Growth and access to large consumer markets were provided by China, but at the expense of an increasing reliance on a formidable competitor that controlled international investment and controlled rare earth production. Beijing's political model was not trusted by the G7 economies. However, they were unable to completely ignore its economic gravity. Shared ideals were not the foundation of this new system. It was molded by necessity. Global engagement was now motivated by survival. Carney encountered a tactical conundrum in Ottawa. Reopening ancient scars was a risk of becoming closer to China. The 2018 arrests of Michael Covery and Michael Spavor, as well as the subsequent trade retaliation, were still recalled in Canada. However, adhering to the outdated approach meant watching growth stagnate in a world where U.S. policy changed without warning. Carney so chose a more subdued, methodical approach. Canada refrained from counter-tariffs and strong words when Trump attacked the Ontario advertisement. Rather, the administration promoted a $300 billion development strategy focused on developing Asian markets. As part of its new trade framework, more nations are in line for negotiations, which started with the Philippines under the ASEAN framework. The strategy was simple. Diversification, not reliance, is the key to achieving economic stability. American acceptance was no longer the focal point of Canada's trade strategy. It was centered on opportunity, where relationships could develop without ongoing political conflict and Canadian commodities could flow freely. In contrast to Trump, who ruled via emotion, Carney relied on patience and logic. According to observers in Ottawa, by refusing to escalate, he presented Canada as a responsible player in a volatile situation, a partner open to interacting with anyone who upheld fair trade. Beijing saw the difference as well. China saw Canada as an autonomous actor, willing to cooperate rather than as a stand-in for Washington. In the meantime, it was become harder to overlook the wider effects of America's tariff policies. Both the World Trade Organization and the U.S. Chamber of Commerce issued warnings that protracted tariffs were driving up consumer costs and upsetting international industrial networks. Vehicle and energy costs were the main drivers of the nearly 5% increase in U.S. inflation by October 225. China's manufacturing share in the world hit 31% at the same time, the highest level in 5 years. Trade channels were being discreetly reconfigured throughout Europe and Asia to lessen exposure to the unpredictability of the United States. This did not imply a break with Washington on the part of the West. It indicated that nations were developing more possibilities. Practically speaking, this change resulted in more Canadian grain passing via Pacific shipping lanes, more Asian companies investing in Western resource projects, and more Chinese investment in European infrastructure. There was no longer a single center of gravity in the world. Although Trump saw his tariffs as a means of enforcing discipline and winning over allies, the outcome had the opposite effect. The policies encouraged countries to diversify their economy and build new networks that lessen their reliance on the U.S. What started out as an effort to uphold American supremacy has turned into the impetus for a new sort of world order, one in which regions that were formerly solidly under U.S. authority see an increase in China's economic influence. Canada's outreach to Asia is a reaction to shifting circumstances rather than a betrayal. The increasing interaction between Europe and Beijing does not imply allegiance. It is an indication of adaptation. Every action is motivated by a need for security in an unpredictable setting. Additionally, as America becomes more inward-looking, its allies become more outward-looking. Confrontation has always been the foundation of Trump's trade strategy. His administration imposed a barrage of tariffs as soon as he took office, including 10% on the majority of imports and a particularly harsh 50% on Canadian metals. The underlying notion was simple: return output to U.S. firms and compel allies to agree to U.S. demand. Early headlines praised the concept while emphasizing modest increases in domestic employment and productivity. However, as 2025 progressed, the hidden expenses started to come to light. Everything was altered by that small alteration. Instead of tightening the screws on Ottawa, the tariffs were starting to affect American consumers. Manufacturers expressed increasing annoyance as supply chains faltered and inflation increased. The more Washington pressed, the more obvious it became that the two nations were more connected than the tariffs permitted. Even some White House officials started admitting behind closed doors what the facts shown to be indisputable. Isolating itself from its nearest neighbor would be costly for the United States. In this setting, Carney brought up the Keystone RD pipeline, one of the most contentious issues in contemporary North American politics. The mention quickly attracted notice. Keystone had represented the gap between environmental concern and energy policy for over 15 years. In 2015, Barack Obama canceled it. During his first term, Trump revived it. On his first day in office, Joe Biden shut it down once more. Even TC Energy, the project's developer, had completely given up on it by 2025. Nearly everyone believed it was lost forever. Carney mentioned Keystone as a signal rather than a development plan. The message was subtle yet direct. Gas and oil resources in Canada are not just for export. They are an essential part of the infrastructure of the continent. In addition to giving Canada's energy-rich regions a new outlet for output, A revived pipeline would offer the U.S. a stable substitute for unstable foreign suppliers. It would ease pressure on Alberta and provide a chance for mutually beneficial economic collaboration. It was a notion that resonated politically with Trump, who had long positioned himself as the champion of U.S. energy independence. The president might claim triumph for reviving a significant enterprise if he accepted it. He would have to answer difficult questions about why America favored expensive, erratic imports over reliable Canadian supply if he rejected it. In any case, Carney had presented Canada as an essential ally in an initially one-sided negotiation. Ottawa was now taking the lead instead of just responding. Trump was open to the notion, according to later reports. Although no official agreement was reached, the mood shifted. Washington needed something that only Canada could provide for the first time since the start of the tariff war. From a diplomatic perspective, things appeared normal. A few handshakes, grins, and assurances of more conversation. But the scales had subtly shifted. The numbers revealed a distinct picture beneath the photo ops. US exports fell by about 4% in the second quarter of 2025, according to data from the Bureau of Economic Analysis. This decline was mostly caused by retaliatory trade actions and rising prices for essential goods. Production slowdowns were being warned by factories that had previously applauded the levies. Domestic output fluctuated while consumer prices increased. What started out as a campaign to highlight American resiliency was becoming a vicious cycle of increased costs and mounting political annoyance. Governors and manufacturing associations in the Midwest started to rebel. Tariff relief was being pushed by states that have long backed the administration's economic objectives, especially for trade with Canada. They maintained that re-establishing ties with the partners who initially made American industry possible was a better way to safeguard it than erecting barriers around it. In order to restore influence, Canada had switched from defense to offense, employing accuracy rather than conflict. Carney had balanced the scales by using Trump's own strategies as leverage. The next stage of negotiations awaits both countries as autumn deepens. It's unclear if those talks result in a more comprehensive North American energy agreement